for the board.
Committee of the whole to order. Number 2, condition of the Opera House.
You want to start or do you?
Pretty much your agenda.
So when I've been at the Opera House lately, I had a couple tours through there and things for the museum. I've been noticing there's a lot of cracked plaster in the lower level as well as some broken, I found for sure one light fixture, but I think there might be 2. And I love that we have a full renter in there, and I love that, but I just wonder if maybe his equipment could go in a little bit more stable place at the Opera House. Because of all the vibration, it's cracking plaster. And I think I've talked to you a bit about it.
Yeah, the only place I can think upstairs that would be stable would be the northern 40% of the gym, because that's got a concrete ceiling.
Yeah.
And then the southern half of it's cross.
Yeah. I mean,
Not
the
cross.
Historical Society has lost irreplaceable items that have actually been knocked down off of shelves on the mezzanine level. So this is how much vibration we're getting in the building. I didn't bring photos, but I take photos just so that we can catalog what happened to it, because these are donated items, and I have to catalog. But there's so much vibration, it's even knocking stuff off of shelves.
It's either that, or I don't know if we could go downstairs.
No, there's not enough room for that. Or he could go downstairs.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think with those big, I don't even know what those are. But when you're there, we had a meeting one night. Do you remember that meeting we had, and the banging and the banging and the banging? I think it's those things that he has that they hit.
They're heavy bags.
They're heavy bags, and I don't even know how much that weighs, but they're full of water. I'm even concerned about the condition of the hardwood flooring, and granted, he's got his foam, but could that be hurting something? I mean, you can't tell me that's... I just worry about the condition of the building. The amount of money that was poured into the building, renovated, it would be a shame if we didn't maybe speak up now and say, would it be more appropriate to put those heavy bags downstairs on the concrete? There's carpeting, there's closer bathrooms.
I'm not saying it wouldn't be feasible, but we also are committed to other rentals down there. The stepping on. We also have the lunch site, which is a daily activity.
Yeah.
So that would be the meal site.
Well,
now granted, their numbers are low. I have numbers which says as of right now the 19 averages, they're only doing 14.5 people average per day takeout, and they're doing 1.5 person per day average eat in. So it's just...
I love that we have a full renter there. I've met Sean, he's great. Unfortunately, if anyone has an event there, he may or may not put his stuff or even move it out of the way. I had the entire 3rd grade coming from Hortonville Elementary, and I just asked if his equipment could be moved to the side so that the kids weren't touching it. And I got there that day, everything was exactly, in fact, he had taken it, put it closer to the door to kind of, I think, redirect the kids. It's hard, and I love that we have a full renter there, but I think if we could find some other alternate place, especially, I think what's so hard for him is to move those big, heavy things. Maybe move the heavy stuff downstairs. I don't know what to do.
This may be a moot point, but he was in yesterday. I think he's close to signing a lease in that space next to us. So
Okay.
I think he'll be moving.
Okay. And,
So,
yeah.
but he brought up an interesting point. He said he feels like he's being picked up, but I can see
No.
everybody's concern. His remark to me was, what's the difference between our workouts up there and a dance, a band?
I get it. And maybe a lot of the cracks
wedding.
that are
Yeah.
down there now, the cracks are, I mean, I look back on, when was all that replastered down there, Carl?
Oh, 10, 15 years ago, maybe?
And we went without cracks for that long.
Yeah. Well, I get what Peter's laying at,
Yeah,
but
I
it's almost
do.
like a dance every day.
Right.
I know. I can see both sides of it.
And I love that we have a renter in there. It's just, and I may be premature on this, but I had a lengthy phone call with someone last night who, and I can't divulge much information because I need to talk to you, David, about this, but they're looking at booking some larger acts at the Opera House, enough that they would need to talk to, maybe make sure we have security and that sort of thing. They want to see how the doors are there to make sure that they've got decent amount of security, and I have to talk to you on that. But I think, yeah, it could be a dance that makes that much jostling. But we went all those years without broken light fixtures and cracks.
Yeah, there could be some issues there. you know, damage.
Yeah,
Keep in mind though, and I'm not defending Sean, I'm just
I know. I
talking with
like Sean.
Carl, and having done a pretty good assessment of that building, we're also dropping about 1/8 to 1/4 inch on that back wall annually.
Oh, wow.
So we might be, when you're moving, it might be structural. It might not be the gyrations and the vibrations.
Could
It
be,
might
I
be
don't
that
know.
building because it's sinking.
yeah. The light fixture, I think that's, yeah.
That could be.
The cracking, I mean, just because I go in that basement door, and usually as I'm walking out, I mean, I look around. I mean, it just, it's something that I do, and that's when I noticed the crack, and that's when I looked up and saw the broken light fixture.
If he moves out, what's the value of losing that lease?
I don't know.
$6,000
What, annually?
annually.
Well, we might be able to make it up otherwise.
The phone call I got last night would make that up plus.
Okay, well, maybe it's best he does move on.
I don't know. I like Sean, and that's where this was really hard for me to bring it up to Carl and David about the condition. I just noticed the cracks, and then I noticed the light fixture, and we've been at meetings before, you've heard the banging, and I get it, that's what he does, that's their business. But if it's hurting the condition of the building, we could find an alternate location in that building, maybe the lower level is best for the
Yeah.
heavy bags.
But as David pointed out, there's some issues with the food service down there too.
Yeah,
They would be in the back half though, right? The
That would-
heavier.
Honestly, that bag would take up that entire lower level.
Yeah.
Well,
Because
I
they're
suppose it
they're
would.
swinging,
I
they're
suppose it
swinging,
would, yeah.
weapon, or not weapons, they got, I'm more worried about the ceiling downstairs then, because it's a height
You're-
constraint.
well, the
Yeah.
other thing I thought of too is in the summer months, because when I would go into the opera house, like in the ballroom, it was always warm, and he always had a lot of fans, he had the windows open, and I know that he maybe preferred to be downstairs where it's cooler too, so,
Yes and no, I mean, they do it for a workout to sweat. The other thing I was concerned about is, are we gonna turn that into a smelly dungeon type locker room when they're working out in that basement?
I don't know. Nobody's picking on him, Peter, I'll tell you that. I mean, I've had,
The what?
nobody's picking on him. Honestly, I've had some great conversations with them.
Mhm.
I was a little, I'll be honest, the day I had the third graders through there, because I was real specific about that, and I had asked months ahead of time. I just know that third grade kids won't leave that alone, and they didn't leave it alone.
Well, you know, I have some personal issues with this too, because I don't know, as you well know, I built a suite in the back, and that's where we stay on a daily basis unless we head north. I don't know that I'm in line with him coming in at 5 o'clock in the morning and bouncing these balls around and playing this music. You know, that's like having a big noisy neighbor. But anyway, maybe the best option would be to work with him to maybe try it downstairs and see what happens. And if there's damage because of it, make him responsible.
Can we try just seeing if he'll willing to put it on the north side of the gym?
Yeah.
Because the
Across
north
Try
side,
that
isn't that
first.
isn't there like a concrete wall where the bathrooms are, and then there's another concrete where the front of the building is, right? Isn't there almost like two concrete?
Where the bathrooms all, on that wall,
Yeah,
from that direction north,
North.
back
So-
towards Main Street is concrete ceiling.
Yeah.
Concrete ceiling, yeah.
so that
So
might at
if he
least,
keeps everything along the entire north wall, he'll just be spread out further, but
Be
thinner.
longer
Instead of taking up the whole area under the mezzanine, we'll just force him along the whole wall. He probably won't mind, we'll talk to him.
no, and he's got other equipment, it's just those heavy bags.
Yeah.
Because of the, that building is also a historical landmark, it's a state registered building, so I think we need to also consider the preservation of that.
But you also have an issue with the water. That's a good point. If
It's-
one of those puncture,
That could hurt the harbor flooring.
and then
But-
there was a lot.
That hardwood flooring can't be fixed anymore, it's
No,
on
it
the last
can't.
line. There's nothing else to say.
They're not making contact to that part of the bag anyway.
They've
It's-
got like a foam pad. He's got a foam pad. It's not that so much, it's just I'm more worried, just that constant jarring, on that hardwood flooring. It's meant to be danced on, I get it. But is it meant to be, I don't even know how much those weigh.
150 pounds.
150 pounds a piece, okay. I know I tried moving it, but I couldn't move one.
Well, maybe with
I tried.
these cracks and everything, we kind of discovered them now, maybe we should, maybe every 2 or 4 weeks, kind of monitor and see if we're getting any more cracks, and sometimes cracks appear and you don't know exactly when. I'm saying, just so we get a good feeling,
I don't,
then with him moving, if you would, that'd be great.
does anybody remember what we did to the old PD building with underpinning it? I'm sure Bob does, but I don't know if any of the board members do. Jeannie might. We spent about $18,000 putting underpinnings under the old PD to hold that wall.
Okay.
If we're gonna keep the Opera House, we're probably gonna have to do $75,000 worth of underpinnings on that back wall. It's going down. You can see it by the back doors. It's probably why all the doors in that side of the building all have goofy jams, and the doors have been cut and modified. So it's been going on a while, and this is probably not helping it, but
No.
There's gonna be more issues.
That's something we need to address at
Yeah,
some point
absolutely,
very soon,
because
because it's.
Not only that, when you open up Main Street eventually, you could open up a big can of worms. And there's a lot of issues that could be
Well,
dealt with.
and planning ahead, I think Sean's a great renter. I think, you know, I've had good contact with him, but I think if something else does pop up, long-term, maybe we look at that as we consider, like, okay, let's say the long-term is gonna be something that may damage the building or we reevaluate. I don't even know, do we have a contract with Sean, or is it
It's
just?
month to month.
It's just month to month,
Yeah.
okay.
Based on his numbers.
Okay.
He's at his max. So we wanted a percentage of what he brought in up to $500, so he's at that max.
Okay.
So he's growing. I mean,
Yeah.
he's,
Maybe the long-term resolution for this whole thing is to sell that building off.
No. That
Or-
building was bought with shares from the people in this community.
Well, then maybe we get rid of the white elephant and have a nonprofit pick it up. Like the Hortonville, not the Civic Association,
preservation.
No,
yeah, the preservation.
no. I think we have a lot of people in this community that worked really hard to maintain, and the amount of money that was poured into the building for renovations, for us to turn around and sell it. And that's not it, I guess that's another whole ball of wax. But I know that, I think it actually came to a referendum last time, didn't it come down to a referendum?
96.
And it
Yeah.
was voted no.
But that might be different today.
Right.
That's 23 years ago.
If people knew the upkeep on the building.
Actually, it was voted, my recollection is voted yes,
yeah.
but barely.
Yeah.
Barely. And
Right.
then it,
It was
So the
close.
board, and there's a good lesson there. So you had this advisory referendum. And, it's not legally binding, but you're kind of obligated to follow the voters' decision.
Yeah.
And so they went through this whole thing, and the vote was real close, but the majority was in favor. And the board then decided that, well, that's not a mandate. And so they ended up keeping it. Because at that point, Fred Bearwald
yeah.
was
Yeah.
offering
I
to
just ran
purchase
across
that.
the old newspaper clippings a few
Mhm.
weeks ago and read it.
Yeah,
So maybe at some point we revisit that.
Well, now I know whether I'm ready for board or not.
And, if that building could be sold for, why stick 100,000 in the underpinning when we could probably take those funds from a sale? I mean, that facility would be a nice shop area, for off-street.
And when that time comes, we'll have to ask the citizens of this community what they want to
Yeah,
do. Because there's a
right.
lot of people that are very attached to that building too, for it to go to a private.
But we could take those funds and build a nice facility that would, maybe right on the grounds here.
When I talked to Joan, she had said, because I asked if any of the money that Historic Preservation had.
Historic Society, or, because the preservation is part of the, because Historical
What
Society is
is,
a
what
501c3.
is Joan in?
Historical Society, we are
Okay.
in that.
And she said, I really can't disperse funds because the village owns the building. If the village didn't have their hands on the building, then more funds would come from the Historical Society.
That's not my understanding. In fact, Joan and I had a lengthy conversation recently about how upset she was that the village was gonna sell that building. So that contradicts what she and I talked about. And the big part of it is the Historical Society is a 501c3. They're a separate not-for-profit. They have funding that the village wants to do some repairs on that building, and then that needs to be worked through those two different entities. It's not that the Historical Society can just cut a check to maintain the building. The Historical Society has to work with the village. So I guess I encourage you then, call Joan again, because when Joan and I spoke, and actually it was she that gave me the newspaper clippings about how horrible it was that they were gonna sell this building.
There's also, so I did some
That's not
underlying
true.
grant work with Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation
Mhm.
to try to get funding for HVAC.
Mhm.
Nearly impossible that the village owns it. they will grant fund to the
Right.
historical society, but they won't to a village entity.
Right.
Because they basically say that's taxpayer dollars that should be presenting it. So there's a catch-22 on both sides of it.
It is catch-22, and the Historical Society is regenerating, some new members, and that's a really positive thing. So, I mean, there's funding there, it's just, to just cut a check, a blank check for maintenance on the building, it'd be nice. We have to account because the board has to decide what to do with those funds.
When did the historical registry start?
The
That's more recent.
Historical Society, or their,
No, the fact that it's a
It's a
registered.
historical building?
Yeah,
I don't have the specific date, I have the paperwork on it, I know
Yeah.
that.
but that would have been more recently, that was after the last referendum.
Yeah.
Because that was a big issue then, I mean, you know, putting it in private hands. But at that point, it hadn't been registered as a historic building, and I'm not sure what all, you know, if that is that much protection in that regard.
I
but
think
it-
there
but-
is some, but I don't know.
But at least there's some protection there versus before.
The phone call I got last night, you were just,
Oh, I'm smiling at Ellie.
okay. The phone call I got last night might solve a lot of these financial issues. And I have to talk with you on it,
That's fine.
because I can't
Yeah,
divulge who it
that's
is, but it would be bringing some large enough acts that it would be, I think, a money-making gig for the village. They're actually looking at maybe partnering with the village versus just renting the building, so
And granted,
I'll talk to you.
keep in mind,
Yeah.
what I was challenged to do was create revenue sources. So-
This would be a revenue.
Okay, good.
Big one.
That's a positive. So
Are we good then?
I'll talk to Sean. We'll get him relocated in the short term. I'll stop tomorrow morning immediately, and we'll get it taken care of right away.
Okay.
Because he's got some stuff coming up with weekend rentals anyway, where we'll get him relocated.
Then we will move on to number 3, executive committee dissolution discussion.
Two handouts. Primarily, anything that was highlighted. The single page is the only word or any verbiage that comes from our book of ordinance, which is section 2.05. And then the one that is stapled is anything that has to do with the personnel manual in regards to the executive committee. Again, Julie, this was at your recommendation, so I don't know if you want to lead out on it.
Well, I guess my question is, could a lot of this just simply be, so like when I look at item 2, executive committee shall, and it lists all these things, is a lot of this very similar to what the village board does? Can't it just melt into
Can
the other?
I make a recommendation, because I went through this
Okay,
packet?
please do.
And so if we go to the single handout, you'll see that it says, he shall also serve as chairman of the executive finance and personnel committee, which I don't really think we need to do anything with our, we could basically strike that and you could take that executive committee out of the ordinance code, so you could essentially do an amendment to 2.05 and just reword it, so that'd be an easy fix for the ordinance code. Getting into the personnel manual, if you go to page 2, on the highlighted areas of the executive committee, obviously that you could do away with the entire executive committee sentence there. Letter A, my suggestion would be to move that to the village board. If you want to take some time to read that. Letter B, I would also move to the village board. Letter C, my recommendation would be to put that under mine, which would be moving down to the village administrator, letter number 4 on the next page. So under my duties.
Starting with C.
Yep, C. So
True.
A and B would go to the village board, so it would move up.
Yep.
Letter C would go down to number 4 for the village administrator's responsibility. Item D, I'd also move to the village board. And then we had, I'll give you a couple here. E, F, G would be to, I'm sorry, E, F, G, and H, I'd move to the village administrator. Letter I would move to the village board. And then the final 2 would move to the village administrator as well. And then other duties assigned by the village board, that's just a general comment, which could be erased altogether. So essentially, just like you said, Julie, these could be absolved by either the administrator or for the village board, putting them in the proper categories. And then if you turn to page 6, essentially this is the same thing as letter J on page 3. So you could essentially just eliminate the executive committee on that paragraph. You could rewrite it, it's verbiage. You take that verbiage out and it doesn't matter, it's already covered. Same thing with page 8, nepotism, you change it to village board instead of executive committee. And on page 9, same thing, you change it to village board instead of the executive committee. So essentially you're putting the majority of this to the village board or the administrator rather than the executive committee. The only bearing is, honestly, in my opinion, the only bearing that has anything to do with it is my review. And I'm open to the village board at any time. I have no concern in that matter, so.
And we've always done it, I think, village board anyway. So
Last year, when my first went through Al, and then my most recent, my 6th month went through Jeannie. And
the
then,
annual year one goes through the village board.
I did it with Al. And then, actually, I sat in front, because I really didn't have one. I started in September.
Yeah.
So,
And
so
then we
my
changed it.
first real official review was with Jeannie at the 6th month, so. And I'd be proxy to, I guess, what I would recommend for my review is a committee of the whole at 5:30 before a 6 o'clock board meeting. I mean, that's what we wanted to do. And I guess I would entertain that anyway. I have nothing, I want to be able to work with all of you, obviously, so.
Right.
So I guess I'm not up to speed. I don't know if there was anything discussed previously, but why are we entertaining removing the executive committee?
What it came down to was the actions that happened with first starting with the police department, and then more recently with the court. We went to the executive committee prior to the village board.
Okay.
Those actions, there was some comment that it should have been brought up to all members instead of just the 4 on the executive committee to make a decision. Now, a committee is just that. You have an initial conversation, you make a recommendation.
But
So-
isn't the point of the committees, the separate committees, to have a smaller group to discuss issues and then make a recommendation to the larger board where
Absolutely.
everything can come up for discussion anyway?
Absolutely.
But the executive committee in that situation, Jim, and being on the board now for several years, I found that executive committee it doesn't have much of that same committee purpose. It's not public safety, it's not public facilities. Executive committee is one of those things that a lot of municipalities don't even have. So
Okay.
when we met and talked about municipal court, essentially it's the full board that makes the decision. So to bring everyone up to speed and to do an additional meeting, to do what could have maybe been done in 1 meeting versus 2, I just feel like the number of years I've been on this board, I think I've only seen executive committee really come into play twice, and both times it ended up being the full board attended anyway. I'm thinking when Sullivan returned, it was executive committee, but the full committee, or the full board, it ended up being full board there anyway. This executive committee, when it came up for the municipal court, it just was a whole lot of, let's bring everybody else up to speed. I just don't think it's a necessary level anymore. I think it's at one point, maybe there was a reason it served. Why did it,
Well,
do you remember, Bob, why we had?
Yeah, I forget when it became practice. We clearly had it for when J. Everett Mitchell was here. And I don't know that we had it, say, when Bob Duffy was here. Do you remember?
Well, I think we talked a little bit. I think at the purchase time of the industrial park, a lot of things going on. And they wanted to get a smaller group together so could meet with a different contractor,
Yeah.
different players, to talk about things, get a game plan. So I think it went all the way back when Terry Lemron was
Yeah.
village
So-
president, and
yeah.
I think that's when it really got instituted.
So if it really ever happened like something like that, something very specific industrial park, could there be an ad hoc committee created from the village board instead of the full village board meeting for all of these meetings? That could be an ad hoc committee created at
Yeah,
that
you can
time.
always.
You can do that for anything.
Mhm.
But,
Yeah, right.
so I have a couple of concerns. One is, your first point that it's not like the Public Safety Committee or the Public Works. Well, the Public Works and Public Safety Committee aren't like each other either.
No.
Right? But they all serve the same purpose, right? They serve the purpose of having a smaller group that could, and everybody's potentially invited to every committee meeting if they want to be there.
Not that executive committee, I was not aware we were invited, no.
Okay.
But you
Well, it
can.
was discussed afterwards that everybody is,
Afterwards, we were, it
And-
just,
and-
you were there, Jim, because you're on executive
Yeah.
committee, but if the table was turned, I think you'd have a very different opinion, but keep going.
okay. So, I mean, it's publicly noticed, everything, just like every board meeting, just like this meeting. There's public notice, everybody's told about it. I have, other than that, I mean, so I have concerns about dissolving anything. A couple of the concerns that I have, and going through this when you were reading this, and it's not a criticism of you, but I look at this and think, okay, well, if we put this over on the village administrator, and we put this over on the village administrator, and we put this over on the village administrator, it's great as long as the village administrator is doing a great job, right? And as long as they are communicating very well to the board members, right? But I think the point of having something like this, where these things were placed under that umbrella of that committee, is so that there is some line of communication to the board members that is required, because those board members would have to meet and they would have to discuss it, and then the village administrator would have to be involved instead of the village administrator making the decision on his own, because those duties fall under his umbrella now. And then if there is no line of communication, which has happened in the past, right? And there's
Yeah.
no line of communication, then everybody else is in the dark.
Well, what if,
So that is one of my biggest concerns when we're going through line by line here of dissolving this.
so instead of maybe making a lot of these on administrator, again, no offense against you, David, it just is village board.
That really lengthens.
Yeah,
It
that's the
lengthens.
other problem.
But I mean, a lot of these are already under village, or like the sole responsibility is the village board. The 7 of us were elected. This is just a smaller, more specific. Why couldn't these be put under village board?
The idea behind of course, the committees, as Jim pointed out, is to 4 or 5 members hear the evidence, make their decision, or their recommendation, and bring it to us, the board. The other problem I have is if there's a personality conflict between an employee because he didn't get his performance review adequately, and it's a conflict between David and the employee, we never see it. We'll never hear it. David will make the decision based on that. The employee will be upset because he thought he was railroaded, and I'll use that term loosely. So this could go 2 ways, but,
I just-
Just one question here. Is there any reason that we can't notify all board members about all the ongoing meetings that are going?
We were notified, but it was immediately into closed session. We were not invited.
we will not know if this is moved, if some of these are moved to David's list.
No, I agree with that.
Yeah.
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 We'll never know.
Probably,
David will
Jim.
come and say, I had an issue with this employee, without our reviewing it and having David give us the background on it. That's a concern to me.
I do recall that we used the executive committee at that one time that we were having employee issues. That the executive committee really was the hearing board for grievances at that point.
So that would, if we did this, that would rule that out.
Yeah, although, yeah, again, you could appoint it at the time, I guess. you know.
Appoint at the time or absorb it in village board. The village board can at that time create an ad hoc.
But what we're trying to do is make the village board effective and not bring a lot of issues to the table that we have to discuss.
Here's
That's
what-
the idea
yeah.
behind the committees.
The most recent with the municipal court, when you have, so getting, some limited information and then coming into a meeting and you don't have everything you need, or I guess I felt like there's already 4 people that have made a decision and it was unanimous. Now we're coming in and we've already been told what the decision was, but really essentially it was a 7-board vote. It turned out to be unanimous.
Yeah.
Which
Well,
likely would have been the result had we just all met to begin with. It
case
just-
in point, look what we did with Jim Muller's group. We made that committee, and the 4 or 5 or 6 of them sat down and
Correct.
resolved it.
Correct.
Otherwise, we would have sat here for
Correct.
meeting upon meeting
I think
with a bunch
creating
of
it
irate citizens.
based on a specific situation given to us, I believe we can all be professional enough to create an ad hoc committee to sort that out, to go say, all right, this is beyond what we should be doing on the board level at this time. Let's get 3 or 4 board members and create an ad hoc. And it could be specific to, it actually doesn't even have to be specific. I
But
just
again,
felt like that particular meeting.
Unless it gets out of hand, though,
Yeah.
that's not gonna happen, unless, otherwise, all we're gonna do is go back and forth in a village board meeting. I
So let me
mean,
ask you this, Jim,
with
or
our- with
maybe
our
this is a
full
Bob
group.
question. I'm gonna go with parliamentary rule here. So, like, let's say I would have come to that executive committee meeting, and because I'm a board member, I'm entitled to be in that closed session, or do I need to be invited?
If it doesn't involve you, I'd say you're entitled to be in
If I'm entitled to be in there,
there.
but I'm not allowed to speak. This is my
That's correct.
understanding. So really, it's
Observe only.
it's observe only. So again, you're taking a 7-member board, you're allowing the 3 members who would normally not be part of that group to observe, but not be part of the discussion.
That's right, and that's with any committee.
Yeah,
Right.
as I say, it's the same for safety and
Exactly.
public works and everything else.
But you would hear everything
Yeah.
that is being said. We would just know if there is a quorum. You would hear everything that was said. And then we still bring that suggestion, that's all it is,
A recommendation.
The recommendation. yeah.
recommendation to the full board.
Mhm.
Then you would be aware, and at that time, that is when you voice your opinion. Because I do think there are reasons to keep it, like we said.
Mhm.
We're
Could we
putting
do-
a lot on Dave's
Yeah.
shoulders.
No, I didn't agree with I mean, no offense, I didn't
No,
agree
that's
with moving
fine.
all this over to you. So
Well,
let me
we
ask
gotta-
you this,
we
could
gotta move on
executive
board.
committee, instead of being each chairperson of the committees, could it go by seniority on the board?
A
Could
committee
we
is,
change that?
a committee is appointed by the president.
I understand that, but executive committee, now you're dealing with a lot heavier stuff here.
What I would tell you, Julie, is essentially any issue that's gonna be of relevance to the entire board, it should be at my discretion, or it would be probably at my discretion to call a committee of the whole, rather than an executive committee meeting. I think that'd be the best solution, and
It
not change
keeps-
anything.
It keeps the line of communication, in my opinion, open, and if we need to go into closed session,
So,
fine,
yeah.
if it qualifies.
You know, Julie, in closing, I feel that you have a riff with this only because you missed out on that and did
No,
not
this
get
goes-
notification.
This goes back to when Sullivan returned as well. I was
Mhm.
allowed to attend the meetings, but couldn't
You couldn't
say
voice
anything.
your opinion.
But then I was asked questions and asked to give input in those meetings. So it was really kind of a tough situation to be in. There, you're sitting there and you're not supposed to say anything. It was meant to observe, and I was happy to observe. Not really happy to be there, but happy to observe. But then when you're asked a question, are you entitled to speak? Are you not? I mean, that was really a tough situation here. So yes, I do have a riff with this particular one that came up with the municipal court too.
We should get to board,
Are
I
we
think.
going to maybe table this at this time and
I
bring it
guess.
back?
That
or-
sounds like.
Right.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess we're gonna-
Okay, and the only bearing,
Just because
the
we're
only
running
bearing,
out
and I'll be brief here, is if we're gonna approve the personnel manual tonight, a lot of these changes are effective. So, I mean, essentially, I don't wanna have to table a personnel upgrade either, so.
Now, could we make an
Because-
amendment to the personnel manual at a later time if we had to?
Yeah,
Well, we can, I mean, it
I would
just,
say leave them in. Leave it in at this time.
okay.
If we need to bring this back, and then
Honestly,
we
we-
have amended that book more than once.
We would
So
look
I
to do
mean,
that after the new year, I
Can
believe.
be done,
I think we'd bring it back after the new year, because we had enough on December 19th,
Yes.
docket already as well,
yes.
so.
Is everyone in agreement with that?
I agree.
Edna?
Agreed.
Okay. Then I need a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
We are now adjourned.